The forest was colder than I expected. Each breath left my lips in pale fog, curling upward before vanishing into the black sky. Snow crunched beneath my boots, and the silence pressed in heavy, broken only by the occasional snap of a distant branch. It was the kind of cold that seeped through layers of wool and leather, the kind that demanded a fire and company. That was why I'd accepted Caleb's invitation in the first place. Caleb and I had been friends since college. Loyal, dependable, the kind of man who called when life grew too busy. He had invited me on this winter hunting trip with a promise of peace, a break from the city and from my life at home. He didn't say it directly, but I knew he could tell something about me had grown restless. Maybe I had been too obvious. Maybe my smile didn't reach my eyes anymore. Still, I came here telling myself it was about friendship, about breathing different air, sharpening old instincts, testing myself against the cold. But then I saw him. Elias, Caleb's uncle. I hadn't expected him to join us, but when I stepped out of the truck and into the clearing, Elias was already there, leaning against the cabin wall like he had been carved into it. Broad shoulders beneath a thick flannel, beard flecked with gray, eyes that caught and held mine with a steadiness that unsettled me. He didn't smile the way Caleb did. He didn't need to. His presence demanded attention without effort, like the woods bent inward toward him. Didn't think Caleb had friends who looked so civilized, Elias said, voice low, roughened by smoke and weather. His gaze traveled over me openly, appraising, bold in a way I wasn't used to from strangers. I laughed it off, muttering something about not being as fragile as I looked. But inside, something twisted sharp and hot. I reminded myself of Nathan, my partner waiting at home, the one whose texts I hadn't answered since stepping off the plane. Nathan was steady, warm, and faithful. Everything I thought I wanted. Everything I was supposed to protect. And yet Elias's stare lingered in a way that made the cold feel less biting. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled, wood popping as we unpacked. Caleb moved easily between us, cheerful, oblivious. He filled the silence with stories from the drive, half-jokes about who would freeze first. Elias spoke little, but when he did, his words were sharp, deliberate. He asked about my work, about Nathan, about the life I'd left behind for a week. His questions felt too direct, like hands pressed against my chest. I told myself to keep my answers light, casual. Yet each time our eyes met across the firelight, something unspoken passed between us. That night we sat in a triangle around the flames. Caleb, drunk on whiskey, eventually slumped against his chair and drifted into a heavy sleep. The fire dimmed, shadows stretched long across the wooden walls, and Elias shifted his seat closer to me. I heard the scrape of his boot against the floor before I felt the brush of his leg against mine. It wasn't an accident. I should have pulled back. I should have thought of Nathan. Instead, I sat still, pulse hammering, pretending I hadn't noticed. But Elias leaned closer, his shoulder almost brushing mine, his heat bleeding through the cold air. "You don't seem like the hunting type," he murmured, low enough that Caleb's snoring wouldn't break. "I'm not sure what type I am anymore," I admitted before I could stop myself. The words slipped out raw, too revealing. Elias's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "That's a dangerous thing to say out here." I forced a laugh, tried to steer the conversation toward safer ground, but he didn't let me. His gaze stayed fixed, steady, unflinching, as if he saw through every mask I had built over the years. My throat went dry. My body betrayed me, leaning imperceptibly closer, searching for more of his warmth. The fire collapsed in a shower of sparks, and I jerked back, startled. Elias didn't move. His hand rested on his knee, fingers tapping once against the wood. Measured. Patient. That night, when I finally lay in the narrow bunk, I stared at the ceiling until the beams blurred. Nathan's voice replayed in my memory, messages I hadn't answered whispering like guilt in the back of my skull. And yet the only image that stayed with me was Elias's eyes across the firelight, daring, unapologetic. I told myself it was nothing. Just a tension in an empty forest. Just the hunger for warmth in a place designed to strip you bare. But deep down, I knew it wasn't nothing. The woods had their silence, but between Elias and me, there was already a noise building, a restless hum beneath the cold, an invitation I wasn't sure I could refuse. And when I heard the creak of floorboards outside my bunk, heavy footsteps pacing the cabin in the dark, I knew the night had only just begun. The morning came gray and heavy. I woke to the sound of Caleb crashing pans in the kitchen, muttering about coffee and bacon. The bunk felt colder without the fire, the air biting at my skin as I dragged on yesterday's clothes. For a moment, I let the rhythm of Caleb's voice steady me, an anchor pulling me back toward ordinary friendship, away from what had stirred inside me last night. But then Elias stepped in from outside, snow dusting his flannel, steam curling from his breath. His eyes cut straight to me, unflinching, deliberate. He didn't need words. The look alone told me he hadn't forgotten either. "Morning," I said, too quickly, as if the word could erase the heat I felt. He smirked, dropping a pile of firewood onto the hearth. "Didn't think you'd last the night. Thought city boys froze easy." The barb was playful, but his tone carried something heavier. I swallowed the retort burning on my tongue. Caleb, oblivious, slid me a mug of coffee and started talking about which trail we'd take first. I nodded in the right places, but Elias's presence pressed on me like a hand at the back of my neck. By mid-morning we were in the woods, rifles slung across our shoulders, boots crunching through the snow. Caleb took the lead, chatting easily, his voice bouncing through the frozen trees. Elias walked behind me, close enough that I could feel the drag of his gaze. Every step made me hyper-aware of the space between us, space that felt charged, unstable, dangerous. At one point, Caleb pushed ahead to check tracks, leaving me alone with Elias. I bent to adjust my boot, and he stepped closer, the heat of him burning through layers of winter gear. His voice brushed my ear. "You looked restless last night." I froze, hand tightening on my laces. "I couldn't sleep." "That's not what I mean." I straightened, pulse hammering. He didn't back away. His eyes pinned me, sharp and knowing. It felt like being hunted. "Elias," I started, but he cut me off, his hand briefly brushing my shoulder. Just a touch, but it set fire beneath my skin. Before Caleb returned, Elias was already a step back, face unreadable, leaving me raw and shaken. The day passed in fragments. Caleb's laughter, the sting of cold air, the constant awareness of Elias moving near me. Each stolen glance deepened the ache I couldn't name. By the time we returned to the cabin, my body was thrumming with unspent energy, my thoughts tangled between loyalty and hunger. After dinner, Caleb stumbled off early, whiskey loosening his step. The cabin quieted again, fire throwing orange light across the walls. Elias sat opposite me, leaning back in his chair, one arm draped lazily across the table. He studied me with a patience that felt unbearable. "You're wound tight," he said finally, voice low. "Like you're holding something in." I laughed nervously. "Maybe I just need sleep." "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "That's not it." His words dropped into the silence, heavy, undeniable. My throat went dry. I wanted to deny it, to walk away, but my body leaned forward instead. "Elias," I whispered, as if saying his name might break the spell. But he was already moving, crossing the small space between us, his hand sliding against the back of my neck. The kiss was sudden, fierce, nothing like Nathan's careful affection. Elias tasted of smoke and whiskey, his beard rough against my skin. For a heartbeat, I resisted. Nathan's face flashed in my mind, his steady smile, his trust. But then Elias's tongue pressed against mine, his grip tightening, and my resistance collapsed. The hunger I had tried to bury surged free. I kissed him back, hard. The chair scraped behind me as he pressed me against the table, the fire roaring louder in my ears than the crack of wood. My hands clutched his shirt, pulling him closer, needing more. The cold outside didn't matter anymore. Here, there was only heat, dangerous and consuming. When we finally broke apart, breathing ragged, I stumbled back, guilt slamming into me. My lips burned with betrayal, my chest heaved with conflict. This can't happen, I gasped. Elias's gaze was steady, unrepentant. It already did. He stepped back, letting the silence stretch. The fire hissed, a log splitting in the flames. "You've been waiting for something like this," he continued. "I just gave you permission." His certainty cut deeper than any accusation. Because part of me knew he was right. I collapsed into my chair, running a hand through my hair, trying to steady my breath. Every nerve still screamed for more, even as my mind screamed Nathan's name. I felt split in two, faithful partner, reckless stranger. Elias leaned closer, his voice a murmur that coiled around me. "No one has to know. Out here, it's just us." The words settled heavy, poisonous and sweet. I couldn't meet his eyes. I didn't answer. I didn't walk away either. That night, long after Elias had gone to his bunk, I lay awake, staring into the dark. My lips still tingled with the memory of his kiss, my body still thrummed with the echo of his touch. Nathan's name lay heavy on my chest, but when I closed my eyes, it wasn't Nathan's face I saw. It was Elias's. And deep down, I knew the line I had crossed could never be erased. The next day carried the weight of secret. Caleb's laughter was still easy, his stride still light as we trekked through the snow, but every time Elias's gaze brushed mine, my chest tightened. Last night's kiss hadn't been erased. It lingered, raw, carved into my skin like a brand. I thought avoiding Elias might steady me, but avoidance only sharpened the hunger. Every small act became charged. His hand brushing mine when he passed me a flask. The smirk tugging at his mouth when Caleb turned away. The heavy silence when we were alone, broken only by our uneven breathing. I kept thinking of Nathan, of his steady warmth, the promises we had built together. Yet even as guilt clawed at me, my body betrayed me. I was restless, alert, alive in ways I hadn't been in years. That evening, the weather turned. A storm rolled in sudden and brutal, snow driving against the cabin walls, wind howling like an animal outside. Caleb cursed, fumbling with lanterns, then retreated early, exhausted from the hunt. His door clicked shut, and I was left with Elias by the fire. He leaned back in his chair, legs spread wide, the firelight throwing his features into sharp relief. His presence filled the room, thick and inescapable. "You've been quiet all day," he said. I shrugged, eyes fixed on the flames. "Too much on my mind." "Guilt." His tone was blunt, unflinching. The words stung. I looked at him then, anger sparking, but his eyes held mine without apology. "I should never have let last night happen," I said, voice low. "You didn't let it," Elias replied. "You wanted it." The truth of it landed hard. I hated him for saying it, but hated myself more for knowing it was real. He stood and crossed the room, slow, deliberate, until he was beside me. I should have moved, should have pushed him away. Instead, I sat frozen as his fingers brushed my jaw, tilting my face toward his. His beard scraped against my skin as he kissed me again, slower this time, deliberate, as though he wanted me to feel every consequence. I groaned against his mouth, the sound torn from somewhere deep. My hands clutched his flannel, pulling him closer, until I was straddling his lap, the chair groaning beneath us. His hands gripped my hips, steady, commanding, pulling me down against him. The storm outside vanished. All that mattered was the heat between us, the roughness of his grip, the raw hunger in the way he kissed like he wanted to consume me whole. When we finally pulled apart, foreheads pressed together, my chest heaved like I'd been running. "This is wrong," I whispered, though even my voice shook with desire. Elias's hand slid to the back of my neck, thumb pressing against my pulse. "Then stop." But I didn't. I kissed him again, harder, sealing the betrayal with my own lips. The hours that followed blurred, skin against skin, whispered curses, bodies moving in sync to the rhythm of something dangerous and unstoppable. Every touch felt like a line crossed, every gasp like a nail driven deeper into the coffin of my loyalty. When it ended, I lay sprawled against him, sweat cooling against my skin despite the cold. The fire had burned low, shadows stretching long across the cabin walls. My chest ached, not from the exertion, but from the weight of what I'd done. I thought of Nathan then, his smile, his faith in me. My stomach twisted. I wanted to believe this was a one-time collapse, a single storm-fueled mistake. But Elias's arm draped heavy around me, possessive, and deep inside I knew this wasn't the end. He murmured against my hair, voice steady and sure. You needed this. Stop pretending otherwise. I pulled back, searching his face. You don't know me. His lips curved, almost a smile. I know enough. The sound of a door creaking made us both freeze. Caleb's footsteps padded into the main room, his silhouette flickering against the firelight. My heart slammed against my ribs. Elias shifted quickly, pulling a blanket across us, movements smooth, practiced. Caleb yawned, rubbing his eyes. Fire's dying. You two still awake? Yeah, Elias answered easily, his voice calm, controlled. Just talking. Caleb nodded, too tired to notice the tension thick in the air, and disappeared again into his room. The door shut, the silence rushed back, and my pulse refused to slow. I stared at Elias, my chest tight with the realization of how close we'd come to being caught. The danger should have sobered me. Instead, it lit something reckless inside. Elias's hand slid along my thigh under the blanket, slow, deliberate. His eyes never left mine. See? Even danger excites you. I swallowed hard, torn between terror and thrill. He was right, damn him. The secrecy, the risk, it made everything sharper, hotter, impossible to resist. I leaned in, kissed him again, knowing full well I was damning myself with every choice. The storm outside raged through the night, but inside, the fire we had lit burned hotter, brighter, impossible to extinguish. And when sleep finally claimed me in Elias's arms, one thought haunted me even in dreams. I had betrayed Nathan completely, and part of me didn't want to stop. The storm passed by morning, leaving the woods blanketed in fresh snow. The world outside looked clean, untouched, as if the night hadn't happened. But inside the cabin, I carried the weight of what I'd done, heavy and unshakable. Caleb moved through the kitchen humming, frying eggs, filling the cabin with the smell of grease and coffee. He laughed about the storm, joked about the deer we'd never find buried under snowdrift. He was his usual self, innocent, trusting, blind. I sat at the table, hands wrapped tight around a mug, and tried to act the same. But my body ached with memory. Every brush of Elias's shoulder against mine, every glance he sent across the room, reminded me of the heat we'd shared while Caleb slept just feet away. I couldn't meet his eyes. Not with Caleb in the room. Not when the guilt burned this hot. Nathan's name rose in my throat like bile. He had texted the night before, a photo of him curled up on our couch, blanket pulled high, captioned with, "Wish you were here." I hadn't answered. My phone still buzzed silently in my pocket, reminders of the life I was supposed to be protecting. But instead of answering Nathan, I had given myself to Elias. That night we made the fire last longer than it needed to. Caleb retired early again, leaving us in the hush of crackling embers. The silence stretched, heavy, as Elias watched me with the same steady patience he always did. "You've been avoiding my eyes all day," he said at last. "Because I can't look at you without remembering." My voice cracked. "Good." He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "I want you to remember." I exhaled sharply, anger and longing tangled inside me. "You make it sound like this is something I can live with. Why can't you?" His tone was calm, infuriatingly certain. "Nathan doesn't know. Caleb doesn't know. Out here, it's just us." I stood, pacing, hands buried in my hair. "You don't get it. Nathan trusts me. He's steady safe. He's the life I built. And I threw it away for what?" Elias cut in, rising to his feet. His height loomed, his presence filling the room again. For fire? For truth? For the first time in years you felt alive. Don't deny it. The word struck deep, unflinching. He was right. I hated that he was right. The argument dissolved into another collision. My mouth against his, teeth clashing, hands pulling, body surrendering to what words couldn't kill. This time it was slower, deliberate, filled with something heavier than lust. A goodbye fire. A final blaze before the ashes. When it ended, we lay side by side on the floor, the fire dimming to coals. My chest heaved, sweat cooling, heart pounding with the certainty of ruin. "This can't follow me home," I whispered into the dark. "It doesn't have to," Elias replied. His voice was steady, but his hand lingered on my chest, pressed over my heartbeat. In the silence, I realized he wasn't asking for more. He wasn't promising a future. This wasn't love. It was survival. Two men colliding in the cold, taking what they needed, consequences be damned. The trip ended quietly. Caleb chatted through the drive back, filling the truck with easy noise. I laughed when I was supposed to, but my eyes kept drifting to the window, to the trees blurring past, to the image of Elias leaning against the cabin door one last time. He hadn't said goodbye, not really. He didn't need to. His look was enough, a reminder that some fires don't die, they smolder. When I stepped back into my apartment, Nathan wrapped me in his arms, warmth and love radiating off him in waves. I hugged him back, tight, my heart splitting under the weight of what he didn't know. His kiss was soft, trusting, and I forced myself to respond, though Elias's taste still lingered at the edges of my memory. Later, as Nathan cooked dinner and told me about his week, I excused myself to the bathroom. I gripped the sink, staring into the mirror at the man who stared back, face flushed, eyes hollow. I barely recognized him. I wanted to confess. I wanted to drop the truth between us like a bomb and watch the pieces scatter, because maybe then I wouldn't have to carry them alone. But when I stepped back into the kitchen, Nathan smiled at me with such warmth, such faith, that the words turned to ash in my throat. So I smiled back. I smiled and let the secret rot quietly inside me. That night, lying beside Nathan in our bed, his breath soft against my shoulder, I stared at the ceiling in silence. The cold woods felt far away, but the fire Elias had lit inside me hadn't gone out. It smoldered, quiet but alive, a reminder of the man I had been out there, the man who let himself burn. I knew I couldn't tell Nathan. I also knew I couldn't forget Elias. The woods had stripped me bare, and in their silence, I had chosen betrayal. And though the storm had passed, I carried its echo with me. Heat that didn't belong, heat I would never escape.